What is the meaning of this? You are a disgrace to this uniform.
The base had its own rhythm, a heartbeat made of steel and boots, engines roaring at dawn, and the constant hum of men and women moving in perfect order. It was a world where discipline was louder than voices, and silence carried more weight than words. And in that world walked a woman few truly noticed. She kept her head lowered, her hair tied back in a way that made her look almost invisible, blending into the gray walls and sharp corners of the military compound. She carried papers, files, and sometimes trays to the cafeteria, the quiet type, who seemed like she belonged to the background. To most soldiers, she was just another face, another civilian staffer with nothing remarkable to her name. But fate has a cruel way of testing arrogance, and in one violent instant, everything about her life changed in front of hundreds of eyes. It happened on a scorching afternoon when the sun seemed to pin the base down under its relentless weight. Soldiers stood in formation, sweat trailing down their temples, eyes locked forward as a high-ranking general paced with an expression carved from stone. General Marcus Aldenthal, broad, with silver hair cropped razor short, was a man used to power. His medals caught the light like fire, each one a reminder of victories and years commanding respect. No one questioned him. No one dared look him in the eye. And yet, the quiet woman, moving between lines with a clipboard clutched in her hands, caught his attention. Not because she did something wrong, but because arrogance often looks for an easy target. Her foot slipped slightly on the hot pavement, and a paper fluttered free from her stack, drifting across the formation like a fragile bird. A few soldiers shifted uncomfortably, eyes flicking but none moved. She bent quickly, trying to gather it before the wind carried it further, but her fingers trembled under the stare of the general. Marcus's voice cut across the air, sharp as a whip. "You there, civilian? What are you doing?" His tone made heads stiffen even tighter in line. The woman froze. Her lips parted, but no sound came. She wasn't used to speaking loudly, wasn't used to having so many eyes pinned on her. A tiny hesitation, the fraction of a second, was enough to ignite something cruel in the general. He strode forward, boots hammering the ground like thunder, his shadow falling over her small frame. "Do you disrespect this base?" he growled. "Do you mock discipline with your clumsiness?" She shook her head quickly, words stumbling out. "No, sir. I dropped a page. It won't happen again." Her voice was soft, fragile, like glass ready to crack. The general's lip curled, disgust simmering. He was the kind of man who thrived on fear, who saw silence as weakness. And weakness to him deserved to be crushed. His hand shot forward, gripping the collar of her shirt with sudden violent force. Gasps rose from the soldiers, but no one dared move. With one brutal yank, fabric tore, the sound splitting the air like a gunshot. The clipboard clattered to the ground, papers scattered. The woman staggered, breath trapped in her chest, the rip of cloth exposing her shoulder and the upper part of her chest. For a heartbeat, she looked vulnerable, humiliated before hundreds of hardened soldiers. But then the silence deepened, grew heavy, like the air itself had thickened, because ink glistened there. Tattoo, bold and unmistakable, etched into her skin. The Navy SEAL emblem, sharp and defiant, marked with precision that could only come from the elite who had earned it. Every soldier knew that symbol. Every soldier knew what it meant. It wasn't something you wore as decoration. It was blood-earned, bone-earned, carved through years of suffering and training that broke even the strongest. The SEAL trident wasn't given. It was survived. The general's grip faltered. His hand loosened as his eyes locked on the ink. Yes. His jaw clenched, but his breath hitched almost imperceptibly. Around him, rows of soldiers shifted, their stoic, masks breaking with wide eyes and furrowed brows. The silence was no longer obedience, was shock, reverence, confusion. The woman straightened slowly, her face calm now, her eyes sharp in a way that hadn't been seen before. Her quietness wasn't weakness, it was restraint. And now that restraint was broken, her presence changed. No longer invisible, no longer just another civilian. She stood like steel forged in fire, Her voice, though soft, carried the kind of, "Wait, that came from someone who had seen the edge of death and returned?" "Don't you ever," she said evenly, "lay your hands on me again." The general's lips parted, but no words came. For the first time in years, he looked small before the eyes of his men. And for the soldiers standing in formation, something shifted. Respect, once chained to a man decorated in medals, slid toward the quiet woman who had carried her silence. Like armor, what no one there knew, what no one could have guessed, was the story behind that tattoo. The story of how she had once been one of them. A warrior. A seal. A survivor of battles never written in books. A woman who had walked through hell and carried its scars in silence. That day marked the unraveling of truths hidden too long. The beginning of a story that would ripple through every heart on that base, because behind her silence was a history of sacrifice, betrayal, and a kind of courage that could shatter even the arrogance of generals. And so began the tale of Alina Marlowe, the quiet woman who once walked among the deadliest fighters in the end. World, and whose mark of survival would force an entire base to confront the meaning of respect, loyalty, and the price of underestimating the quiet ones. Asterisk Alina Marlowe did not flinch under the weight of their stares. She had learned long ago that silence could be a weapon sharper than any blade, and stillness could unnerve more than aggression. For years she had carried herself like a shadow, content to move unnoticed. But the moment the general's hand tore away her disguise, she felt something shift inside her chest. The trident burned against her skin, not as ink, but as memory. A reminder of the storms she had endured and the blood she had spilled. The formation broke into whispers when the general stepped back. Some soldiers lowered their gaze uneasy, while others held their breath, as though afraid the wrong inhale would trigger an explosion. Lena bent slowly, retrieving her clipboard, her movements controlled, deliberate, the way SEALs were trained to do everything with purpose. She pressed the papers against her chest where the shirt was torn, not out of shame, but as a shield against more unnecessary eyes. Then she looked up directly into Marcus Alden's face. The general tried to recover, drawing himself tall, voice rumbling. Who are you?" he demanded, though the question already trembled with the knowledge of its answer. "I was," Alina said, her tone cutting across the air with quiet authority, "one of those men you salute on the battlefield, though you never knew it. I was one of those who earned the trident. You just disgraced with your arrogance. I served, I bled, I buried brothers you could never match in loyalty." She let the words hang. Soldiers felt them in their bones. Marcus clenched his fists, his pride colliding with humiliation. He opened his mouth to respond, but a voice rose from the formation before he could. It was a young private, trembling slightly but unable to hold back. "Sir," he said, glancing at Alina with awe, "that tattoo. No one can wear it without going through hell. She's one of them. She's a SEAL." The truth spread like fire across the rows. More soldiers murmured, respect igniting faster than Marcus could extinguish. For the general, it was a nightmare. His authority, carved from decades of order, was now cracking before his own troops because of a woman he had dismissed as nothing. He barked orders, dismissed the formation, tried to restore control, but no one could unsee the moment. No one could unhear her words. When the soldiers dispersed, Alina turned on her heel and walked toward the edge of the base, her steps calm. But behind her calmness, her mind churned with memories, fragments of a life she had buried in silence. She had never wanted to expose herself. She had left that world behind for reasons no one there could begin to imagine. Yet life, cruel as it was, had just pulled her scars into the light. That night, lone in her small quarters at the edge of the base, she sat by the dim lamp, staring at the torn shirt folded on the table. The fabric was ruined, but it wasn't. The shirt she was staring at was the way it had been ripped open, the way her past had been forced back into her present. She touched the trident with her fingertips, tracing it like one might trace the outline of a grave. Images crashed. Through her mindman, gasping in the dark water, gunfire splitting the night, her own lungs burning with salt as waves dragged her under. She closed her eyes, but the sounds grew louder. Helicopter blades, the snap of a comrade's bone. A scream cut off too suddenly. She whispered into the emptiness, "I didn't come here for this." And then she pressed her palms against her face, steadying her breath the way she'd been trained. Slow inhale, slower exhale, until the shaking stopped. The next morning, the base felt different. Soldiers who once overlooked her now looked at her with something heavier than curiosity or respect, mixed with confusion. Some saluted when she passed, unsure of protocol, but compelled nonetheless. Others whispered, trading theories of her past. But Alina ignored them all. She walked with the same quiet restraint, though inside she felt the shift. Marcus Alden, however, simmered. In his office, he paced like a caged animal, replaying the humiliation. A general undone before his troops. By a slip of temper? Worse, undone by a woman. His pride would not allow it. He summoned his aides, demanding every record, every file on Alina Marlowe, who had authorized her presence. Why had no one told him of her past? But the files were thin, deliberately thin. Classified operations blurred her history into vague lines. Slammed the folder shut, frustration mounting. She was a ghost in the system, erased in ways only the government could erase. Meanwhile, Alina carried on. But as days passed, soldiers began to approach her quietly in corners, with questions not about her tattoo, but about themselves. One young man, barely 20, stopped her near the mess hall. "Ma'am," he said nervously, "is it true? Did you really go through Bud S? The drown-proofing, the log PT, the cold surf?" His eyes were wide, like a child asking if monsters were real. She studied him a moment before replying softly, "Yes, every second of it." He swallowed. "How did you survive it?" Her gaze softened, but her words were sharp. "By deciding. That pain would not decide who I was. Every man breaks. The question isn't whether you'll break, it's what you'll do when you're broken. Do you stay shattered, or do you pull yourself back together sharper than before?" The young soldier nodded, her words embedding themselves into his chest like steel nails. And so it began. Her presence became more than silent. She became a quiet force, an unseen mentor. Soldiers started carrying themselves differently around her, their respect not commanded by her rank, but earned by her essence. The general noticed. It enraged him. Each time he saw men and women glancing at her with admiration, his pride festered like a wound. He began to corner her, subtle digs, veiled threats. "Stay in your lane, Marlowe," he warned one afternoon. "You may impress the wide-eyed privates, but you don't belong here anymore." Alina met his eyes without flinching. "Belonging isn't about paper or permission, General. It's about what you've lived and what you've given. Space isn't yours to own. It belongs to every soldier who's bled for it." His jaw clenched. He hated her calmness, hated how her words cut deeper than shouting ever could. But Marcus Alden was not a man to let go. And his tension coiled tighter. Between them, whispers from Elena's past began surfacing, darker than the tattoo itself. Stories of her final mission, the one that had broken her away from the SEALs, a mission no one dared speak of openly because too many had died and too much had been covered. The kind of mission that stains a soul forever. It was on the third night after the incident that one soldier, an older sergeant who had been deployed in Afghanistan, found her alone by the training field. He approached slowly, respect in every line of his posture. "Marlowe," he said carefully, "I heard your name once, years ago, in Helmand Province." His eyes were haunted, they said. "You were there when the convoy was ambushed." That only one walked out alive. Alina froze, her hands tightening around the railing she leaned against. The desert heat, the explosion, the screams, the dust choking her lungs. She had buried that memory deep, but now it clawed back. She looked at the sergeant, her voice barely, above a whisper, "I wasn't the only one who walked out alive. I just happened to be the only one who came back breathing." The sergeant lowered his gaze. He didn't ask more. The truth was already spreading. And with it came both reverence and fear. That night, as the base settled under the blanket of stars, Alina sat alone again. But this time, she didn't fight the memories. Let them come. Let the ghosts sit beside her. Her brothers, her team. The men she had fought beside, they were gone but not forgotten. She whispered their names into the dark, one by one, as though speaking them might keep them alive a little longer. Tears slipped down her face, not weakness, but a release long denied. And in that moment, she understood something. She hadn't been placed at this base by chance. Life, or perhaps fate, had dragged her here for a reason.
No.
To remind arrogant men like Marcus Alden that medals don't make warriors. To remind young soldiers that silence doesn't mean weakness. And perhaps to remind herself that the fire inside her still burned. Even after years of trying to smother it, the days turned into weeks, and the tension between Alina and the general became the heartbeat of the base. Soldiers leaned toward her, drawn by the authenticity of someone who had lived what they only trained for. And Marcus, desperate to restore his authority, grew reckless. It all came to a breaking point one evening during a live training drill, when he tried to corner her once more. This time in front of the very soldiers who now respected her more than him, he barked accusations, claiming she was undermining his command, spreading poison among his troops. His voice thundered, but the soldiers' eyes didn't follow him, they followed her. Alina stood still, silent until his words burned out. Then she stepped forward, her torn shirt replaced by a plain one, her trident visible as if it were armor. "You mistake respect for poison?" "General," she said, her voice carrying across the field, "I don't ask them to follow me. They choose to listen because truth cannot be ordered. It has to be lived. You wear medals. I wear scars. And every soldier here knows which of those carries more weight." The silence that followed was not just silence, it was judgment. The soldiers stood taller, their loyalty shifting fully. And Marcus Alden, for all his power, knew in that instant he had lost something he would never regain. Alina Marlowe, the quiet woman no one had noticed, had become the heart of the base, not because she sought it, but because the truth of her sacrifice spoke louder than any rank. And when she walked away that night, the stars overhead gleaming like watchful eyes, she whispered once more to the ghosts of her past, "I'm still here. I'm still fighting. Not with guns, not with orders, but with the one thing that never dies: respect." For some, the story ended as a humiliation for a general. But for those who had been there, who had witnessed the moment a shirt tore open and a trident was revealed, it became something else entirely. A legend whispered in barracks, retold in hushed awe. A reminder that sometimes the quietest among us carry the loudest truths. And for Alina, it was not an ending. It was a beginning, a step back into life, into purpose, into the fire, she thought. She had buried. She was no longer invisible. She was seen. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel it not as a burden, but as a gift.